The title of this video already contains a trap, and I want to name it before we do anything else, because falling for it would make everything that follows dishonest. Asking which hybrid system is worst assumes one of them clearly is, and that a video like this one just needs to hand you the loser and let you feel superior about the other badge in your driveway. I've driven both of these systems for years, torn into how they actually work, and read through the recall filings most people never bother opening, and I can tell you right now that the honest answer isn't nearly that clean. Both companies have had a rough stretch recently, closer together in time than either one would probably like. Both companies also build some of the most durable vehicles on the road today. Those two facts sound like they can't coexist, and yet here we are, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why both of them are simultaneously true. Here's where a lot of the bad blood actually comes from, and it has almost nothing to do with the hybrids either company sells today, even though it keeps getting dragged into conversations about brand new cars, as if none of the underlying engineering had changed at all. Honda's hybrid reputation still carries the smell of a system called Integrated Motor Assist, a much older, much weaker setup that couldn't drive on electricity alone and whose battery packs had a well-documented habit of wearing out early in the mid-2000s Civic Hybrid. Honda's fix for that failing battery was a software update that made the car slower and thirstier. The exact two things owners bought a hybrid for in the first place, and the lawsuits that followed left a scar that's still being repeated in comment sections today, even though the system underneath a modern Honda hybrid has essentially nothing in common with that old one. People are scared of a ghost, and tonight we're going to look past it, at the actual machines being sold right now, using numbers that are current as of this year rather than a reputation frozen in place from 20 years ago. I want to be upfront about the shape of this video too, because I think it matters, and because it's different from most videos carrying this exact title. This isn't going to be a tidy countdown ending with a single winner circled in red for you to screenshot and argue about in the comments. It's going to be an honest look at two genuinely different engineering philosophies, followed by a very current, very specific story that neither company's marketing department wants you thinking about too hard. I'm going to show you exactly how each system works in plain language, no engineering degree required. Then I'm going to show you what happened to both companies in the last 12 months specifically, because it's stranger and more even-handed than either fanbase wants to admit. Let's start with the older of the two designs, because it's genuinely the cleverer piece of engineering, and once you understand it, the whole rest of this comparison makes a lot more sense. How Toyota actually does it. Toyota's system is built around something called the power split device, which sounds complicated and is really just a single planetary gear set. The same basic mechanical concept you'd find inside a cordless drill, just wired up to two electric motors instead of a battery and a chuck. And once you see the parallel, it's hard to unsee. Picture a small gear in the center, the sun, a ring of teeth wrapped around the outside, and a handful of little planet gears in between, all meshed together and all free to spin independently. Toyota bolts the gas engine to the carrier holding those planet gears, connects a smaller electric motor to the sun gear, and connects a second larger motor to the ring gear, which is the part actually driving the wheels. That's the entire transmission. There's no clutch, no torque converter, and nothing that shifts the way a normal gearbox shifts, which means one of the most expensive components in a conventional car to eventually rebuild simply doesn't exist here in the form you'd recognize. Here's the trick that makes it work. Pulling away gently, the big motor on the ring gear just drives the wheels on battery power alone, while the engine stays off entirely, silent and unused. Ask for more, and the small motor on the sun gear spins up and starts the engine, which then feeds power into the carrier. By speeding up or slowing down that one small motor, the onboard computer decides how much of the engine's output goes straight to the wheels, and how much gets converted into electricity instead thousands of times a second, constantly rebalancing the split. Vary that one motor's speed, and you get what amounts to an infinite range of gear ratios without a single physical gear ever actually changing. Toyota markets it as an electronic, continuously variable transmission, but it's really a three-way tug-of-war between an engine and two motors, refereed entirely by software running faster than any human foot could ever react. It's a genuinely elegant piece of engineering the kind that makes you appreciate whoever sat in a room decades ago and actually solved this problem properly the first time. And it comes with a personality quirk you've absolutely felt if you've ever driven one hard. Because the engine stays mechanically tied to the wheels through that gear set, and because the system wants to hold the engine in its most efficient RPM range, no matter what your foot is doing, flooring the accelerator sends the engine straight to around 4,000 RPM and holds it there droning, while the car gradually catches up to the engine's speed instead of the other way around. Owners call it the rubber band effect, and some people never notice it while others can't stand it. Nothing is broken when that happens. That's the system doing precisely what it was designed to do, choosing efficiency over drama every single time. And now you know exactly why it sounds the way it does the next time you floor a Camry hybrid at a green light. On the battery side, Toyota spent decades leaning on nickel metal hydride chemistry, the older and heavier of the two common hybrid battery types, all the way through roughly the middle of the last decade, long after critics had written it off as outdated. Toyota didn't much care what critics thought because the chemistry was cheap, well understood, and absurdly durable in real-world use. Only in the newest generation of these cars has Toyota shifted over to lighter, denser lithium-ion packs, the same basic family of battery chemistry used across the rest of the industry, allowing for a bigger jump in both power and efficiency than the old nickel-metal hydride packs could ever have delivered. How Honda actually does it. Honda's current hybrid system, badged E:/HEV, takes almost the opposite approach. And this is the part most casual buyers get completely backward when they're standing in a showroom listening to a sales pitch. There's no planetary gear set anywhere in it. 2 electric motors do almost all the work, and for most everyday driving, the gasoline engine isn't mechanically connected to the wheels at all. Read that again because it's the entire point of the design. In town, in traffic, at anything under highway speed, the engine is simply spinning a generator making electricity, and that electricity feeds the larger motor that actually turns the wheels. In every practical sense, a Honda hybrid in city driving is an electric car quietly carrying its own gasoline-powered generator along for the ride, which is a genuinely different mental model than the one most car shoppers walk in with. So when does the engine actually connect to the wheels? Only at steady highway speed, exactly the condition where a gas engine finally becomes more efficient than running everything through the battery and the motor. A clutch snaps shut and locks the engine directly to the wheels in a single fixed gear ratio, essentially a permanent top gear, no shifting up or down from there. And the newest Civic and CR-V hybrids added a second clutch so that direct connection can kick in across a wider speed range than the earlier version of the system managed. 2 modes, generator around town, direct drive on the highway, and the computer slides between the two so smoothly that most drivers never notice the switch happening underneath them at all. Because the engine spends most of its life completely disconnected from the wheels, a Honda hybrid feels noticeably different to drive in everyday conditions. And it's a difference most people who pay attention actually prefer. There's no rubber band drone in stop-and-go traffic because engine speed and road speed aren't tied together at all, just a clean, immediate electric shove off the line that feels closer to driving a full electric vehicle than a conventional hybrid ever does. Honda even programmed the newer cars to fake stepped gear changes as you accelerate, letting the engine rev up and settle back down in stages purely so the driving experience feels familiar to somebody used to a normal automatic, a bit of theater layered on top of engineering that's honestly clever enough not to need it. Purists grumble about the fake shifts, arguing it's a gimmick papering over the fact that mechanically nothing is actually changing. I understand the complaint, and I also think most everyday drivers genuinely prefer the way it feels, theater and all. There's one quirk of this layout worth knowing before you ever own one. Because the engine usually isn't spinning a normal alternator the way a conventional car's does, the small 12-volt battery that runs your lights, your radio, and your starting electronics gets charged off the big hybrid pack instead. If that main pack ever fully dies, the car doesn't just lose its electric boost, it can refuse to start at all, which sounds alarming until you realize these packs almost always throw a warning light and noticeably degrading performance long before they actually quit, giving you plenty of runway to get it looked at rather than getting stranded out of nowhere. The ghost that won't stop haunting Honda. If you ask the average person standing on the street which of these two companies makes the more trustworthy hybrid, most people will say Toyota without a second of hesitation. And that instinct is coming almost entirely from a system Honda stopped building more than a decade ago. Old integrated motor assist used a single comparatively weak electric motor sandwiched against the engine, purely to give it a small assist off the line, and it never had the strength to drive the car on electricity alone the way both companies' current systems can. In the 2003 through 2009 Civic Hybrid specifically, those aging battery packs developed a habit of losing capacity years before owners expected, leaving drivers with sluggish acceleration, dashboard warning lights, and a car that could barely pull itself up a modest hill the way it used to when new. Honda's response, a software patch pushed to roughly 90,000 of those cars around 2010, protected the failing batteries by leaning on them less, which quietly killed exactly the fuel economy and the performance those buyers had paid extra for in the first place. The two things a hybrid buyer specifically signs up for over a conventional car. It set off two separate rounds of class action lawsuits, one over misleading mileage claims, and one specifically targeting that performance-robbing update, and Honda settled both. The compensation offered to affected owners was a small check, often somewhere around $100, plus a coupon toward buying another Honda, an insult that stuck in a lot of owners' throats given that the actual battery pack those same owners needed cost several times that to replace out of pocket. That whole episode, more than any single engineering fact, is the real source of the cloud that still hangs over Honda hybrids in casual conversation today. None of that has anything to do with the car Honda actually sells you today. The modern 2 motor system is a completely different design, built on a completely different philosophy, sharing essentially no parts and no engineering DNA with old IMA, and judging today's Accord hybrid by a 2006 Civic is roughly like judging a current smartphone by a flip phone that happened to share the same manufacturer's badge decades apart. The reputation, though, doesn't update itself just because the hardware did. It just keeps getting repeated in comment sections by people who've never opened the hood of either car, passed down almost like folklore from one generation of car shoppers to the next, a ghost story that outlived the house it supposedly haunts. What the actual numbers say. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because depending on which measurement you trust, you get a completely different winner, and both measurements are perfectly legitimate ways of asking the same underlying question. Start with brand new car quality straight out of the factory. Honda posted the best score of any mainstream brand in last year's J.D. Power initial quality study, meaning fewer things went wrong with a Honda in the first 90 days of ownership than with almost anything else on the market, hybrid or otherwise, gas engine or electric motor. If your priority is a car that comes off the truck without a single rattle, a single infotainment freeze, or a single warning light in those crucial early weeks of ownership, Honda currently has the stronger claim, full stop. Now flip to long-term durability, and the picture flips with it almost completely, in a way that should genuinely surprise anyone who only read the first statistic. Toyota's own hybrid data goes back to the original 1997 Prius, nearly 3 decades of real-world use across taxi fleets, rideshare drivers, and ordinary family driveways alike, and it shows clearly in the newest independent longevity studies. When analysts broke hybrids out as their own dedicated category for the very first time this past year, ranking models by their real predicted odds of reaching 250,000 miles, every single one of the top spots belonged to Toyota or its luxury division Lexus, without exception. The Highlander hybrid topped the entire list with better than a 3 in 10 chance of hitting that number, more than 3 times the average hybrid's odds, and the Prius, the Camry hybrid, and the Avalon hybrid all followed close behind it in that same ranking. Not one Honda hybrid cracked that particular top tier, in a category with only a handful of qualifying models total. J.D. Power's own 2026 dependability study backs up the general shape of that story too, showing traditional, non-plug-in hybrids overall reporting noticeably fewer problems than gas-only vehicles across the industry as a whole, and dramatically fewer problems than plug-in hybrids specifically, which is essentially the opposite of what most shoppers still walk into a dealership assuming about hybrid complexity. Consumer Reports has found something similar in its own separate surveys, with traditional hybrids from both of these companies averaging measurably fewer reported problems than the gas-only version of the exact same vehicle. Proof that all that extra hybrid hardware isn't automatically working against you the way it sounds like it should on paper. So which number do you trust? The one measuring the first 90 days of ownership, or the one measuring the next 250,000 miles after that? Both are true at the same time. They're just measuring two completely different points in the exact same car's life, and neither company gets to claim a clean, uncontested win once you actually put both studies side by side on the same table, no matter how badly a thumbnail or a comment section wants a single clear answer. The battery, everyone's still afraid of. Before we get to this year's recalls, there's one more myth worth clearing out of the way, because it colors how people read everything else in this comparison, and it's one of the most common questions either of these companies fields at the dealership. Somewhere in the back of a lot of shoppers' minds sits the idea that a hybrid battery is a ticking financial time bomb, a 5-figure surprise waiting to detonate right around the time the warranty runs out, the kind of story that gets repeated at dinner parties by people who've never actually owned one. That fear made a lot more sense 15 years ago, when a replacement pack genuinely could run close to $10,000 and scare off an entire generation of buyers. Today, a replacement pack for either brand typically runs somewhere in the $2,000 to $3,000 range, with a thriving market of rebuilt and remanufactured packs often coming in cheaper still, and these packs routinely last well past 150,000 miles before anybody even needs to think about them. Both companies are confident enough in their own hardware to put a real number on it in writing. Toyota backs its hybrid battery with a 10-year, 150,000-mile warranty, longer than almost anything else in the industry on any single component, gas or electric. Honda's coverage on the hybrid components sits at 8 years and 100,000 miles, still a serious commitment from a company that presumably doesn't want to be writing enormous warranty checks if it genuinely expected these batteries to fail on schedule. Companies do not hand out warranties like that on parts they secretly expect to die early. The old-time bomb story is, at this point, mostly just a story, repeated out of habit rather than evidence, and it's worth setting down entirely before we look at what actually did go wrong with both of these companies this year. The recall neither company wants you comparing. And then this year, something happened that undercuts the entire premise of picking a winner even further. Something that barely got covered outside of local news, but that tells you more about where this whole conversation is actually headed than any single reliability chart could. And it's the story I think you'll actually remember after this video ends. Within a matter of months of each other, both companies recalled hybrids for the exact same underlying failure, a sudden, unexpected loss of drive power while the car is moving, the kind of malfunction that can happen at highway speed with your family in the back seat, and absolutely no warning beforehand. Honda recalled roughly 256,000 2023 through 2025 Accord hybrids over a software programming issue tied to that failure, which is a genuinely enormous number of vehicles for a single recall campaign. Toyota recalled about 51,000 2025 and 2026 Camry hybrids, plus a smaller batch of roughly 3,700 Corolla Cross hybrids, after tracing the same kind of power loss back to an improperly torqued bolt inside the inverter, the component that converts battery power into the electricity the drive motor actually uses. A bolt that, in the worst-case scenario, could also generate enough heat to start a fire. Toyota's own guidance to owners, in the meantime, was blunt. Do not drive the vehicle and park it outside until a permanent fix became available. Jeep's plug-in hybrid Grand Cherokee and a small run of Ford Maverick hybrids landed on that exact same recall list around that exact same window, for their own separate but strikingly similar reasons, which turns this from a two-company story into something closer to an entire industry admitting the same homework assignment simultaneously, almost as if 4 separate engineering teams had all been quietly wrestling with the same underlying problem without comparing notes. An engineering professor who studies hybrid motors for a living put it about as plainly as you could ask for, saying the basic components and the basic technology are largely the same across nearly all of these systems, even when the outward packaging looks completely different from one brand's badge to the next, and that a loose bolt or a stressed electrical connection in almost any of them can generate exactly the kind of heat that trips the same protective shutdown behavior. One family caught in the Jeep version of this story ended up suing over a lease they couldn't get out of and a vehicle they were too nervous to keep driving after multiple failed repair attempts. A reminder that a free software update doesn't always feel like enough once your actual trust in the car is already gone for good. Whatever conclusion you want to draw about which brand handles adversity better once the trouble actually starts, the underlying failure itself wasn't a Toyota problem or a Honda problem this particular year. It was, for a few uncomfortable months, an entire industry's shared problem arriving on dealer lots from 4 different manufacturers at nearly the same exact time. The numbers that don't actually separate them. Before we get to the final verdict, a couple of quick details worth knowing because they round out the picture and they surprise people almost every time they come up in conversation. On fuel economy, this comparison is basically a tie, and that alone catches a lot of shoppers off guard given how differently the two systems actually work under the skin. The current Corolla Hybrid lands right around 50 miles per gallon combined, the Camry Hybrid a shade over that, and Honda's Civic Hybrid and Accord Hybrid land within a couple of miles per gallon on either side of those same numbers. At that level, the difference between the two badges matters less than the weather outside or how heavy your right foot happens to be that particular morning. Where Honda does pull ahead, clearly and consistently, is straight-line acceleration, with the Civic Hybrid capable of reaching 60 miles an hour in a little over 6 seconds, genuinely quick for anything in this segment, while the Corolla takes a far more relaxed 9 seconds and change to get there. If you actually care about feeling quick off the line, that gap is real, and it's noticeable from the driver's seat. It's also worth being fair to Toyota's own gremlins here because no manufacturer, however dominant its reputation, gets to walk away from this comparison completely spotless. The third-generation Prius, built between roughly 2010 and 2015, is known for clogging its emission system if it only ever gets driven on short trips around town, a repair that typically runs a few $100s once it shows up on a service invoice. And the second-generation cars before that carried a coolant pump for the inverter that could fail and, if ignored long enough, cook the inverter itself into a considerably more expensive repair. These are documented, well-understood quirks rather than mysteries, and every vehicle family collects a short list like this eventually. The point was never that one of these two brands is flawless. It's that by the standards of anything else on the road today, both of them remain remarkably trouble-free machines, gremlins, recalls, and old ghosts included. The honest takeaway. So here's where I actually land on all of this after pulling apart both systems piece by piece and reading through a stack of recall filings most owners will never bother to see for themselves. If what you want is the deepest, most thoroughly proven track record on the planet, the best odds of quietly rolling past 250,000 miles without drama, and the comfort of knowing millions of taxi and rideshare miles already vouch for the exact hardware sitting under your hood, buy the Toyota, and buy it with real confidence, no hedging required. If what you want is the strongest first-year ownership experience money can currently buy, a noticeably quieter and more electric-feeling daily drive, and you're genuinely comfortable with a shorter but so far equally solid track record standing behind it, buy the Honda, and buy that with confidence too, because the data backing that choice is just as real. Neither one of them deserves the word worst sitting in a video title, and neither one of them deserves a free pass either, no matter how loyal you already are to one badge over the other. Both just had a very public, very similar stumble in the same 12-month stretch, over the same basic failure mode, arriving from two companies that otherwise couldn't have built these systems more differently if they'd tried. That timing tells you this specific worry has more to do with the general engineering challenge of hybrid power electronics as an entire category than with either company's individual competence or corporate culture. A bolt can work loose in a Toyota inverter the same way a software flag can misfire in a Honda control unit, and from the driver's seat, both failures look and feel exactly the same. A car that simply stops accelerating when you need it to. The real story here was never Toyota against Honda, whatever the thumbnail promised you when you clicked. It's that hybrid technology from both of these companies has gotten reliable enough and popular enough and mainstream enough that a shared industry-wide hiccup can actually make national news at all on cars that, taken as a whole across their entire model histories, are still among the safest long-term bets you can make in a driveway today. 25 years ago, a hybrid breaking down would have confirmed everyone's worst suspicions about the whole technology and probably killed the segment's reputation for another decade. Today, it's newsworthy specifically because it's rare enough to be surprising, a genuine anomaly rather than the expected outcome. And that shift, quiet as it is the actual headline sitting underneath this entire video, buried under a title that promised you a loser and gave you two genuinely excellent, occasionally imperfect machines instead.